Day 79. Joshua 4-6. When the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, Choose 12 men from among the people, one from each tribe, and command them, Take up for yourselves 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan where the priests were standing, carry them with you, and set them down in the place where you spend the night. So Joshua summoned the 12 men he had appointed from the Israelites, one from each tribe, and said to them, Cross over before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan. Each of you is to take a stone upon his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of Israel, to serve as a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask, What do these stones mean to you? You are to tell them, The waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters were cut off. Therefore these stones will be a memorial to the Israelites forever. Thus the Israelites did as Joshua had commanded them. They took up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, one for each tribe of Israel, just as the Lord had told Joshua, and they carried them to the camp, where they set them down. Joshua also set up 12 stones in the middle of the Jordan, in the place where the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant stood. And the stones are there to this day. Now the priests who carried the ark remained standing in the middle of the Jordan until the people had completed everything the Lord had commanded Joshua to tell them, just as Moses had directed Joshua. The people hurried across, and after everyone had finished crossing, the priests with the ark of the Lord crossed in the sight of the people. The Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh crossed over before the Israelites, armed for battle as Moses had instructed them. About 40,000 troops armed for battle crossed over before the Lord into the plains of Jericho. On that day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they revered him all the days of his life, just as they had revered Moses. Then the Lord said to Joshua, Command the priests who carry the ark of the testimony to come up from the Jordan. So Joshua commanded the priests, Come up from the Jordan. When the priests carrying the ark of the covenant of the Lord came up out of the Jordan and their feet touched the dry land, the waters of the Jordan returned to their course and overflowed all the banks as before. On the 10th day of the first month the people went up from the Jordan and camped at Gilgal on the eastern border of Jericho. And there at Gilgal Joshua set up the 12 stones they had taken from the Jordan. Then Joshua said to the Israelites, In the future, when your children ask their fathers, What is the meaning of these stones? You are to tell them, Israel crossed the Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan before you until you had crossed over, just as he did to the Red Sea, which he dried up before us until we had crossed over. He did this so that all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty. And so that you may always fear the Lord your God. Now when all the Amorite kings west of the Jordan and all the Canaanite kings along the coast heard how the Lord had dried up the waters of the Jordan before the Israelites until they had crossed over, their hearts melted and their spirits failed for fear of the Israelites. At that time the Lord said to Joshua, Make flint knives and circumcise the sons of Israel once again. So Joshua made flint knives and circumcised the sons of Israel at Gibeath-haaraloth. Now this is why Joshua circumcised them. All those who came out of Egypt, all the men of war, had died on the journey in the wilderness after they had left Egypt. Though all who had come out were circumcised, none of those born in the wilderness on the journey from Egypt had been circumcised. For the Israelites had wandered in the wilderness 40 years, until all the nation's men of war who had come out of Egypt had died, since they did not obey the Lord. So the Lord vowed never to let them see the land he had sworn to their fathers to give us, a land flowing with milk and honey. And Joshua raised up their sons in their place, and these were the ones he circumcised. Until this time they were still uncircumcised, since they had not been circumcised along the way. And after all the nation had been circumcised, they stayed there in the camp until they were healed. Then the Lord said to Joshua, Today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you. So that place has been called Gilgal to this day. On the evening of the 14th day of the month, while the Israelites were camped at Gilgal on the plains of Jericho, they kept the Passover. The day after the Passover, on that very day, they ate unleavened bread and roasted grain from the produce of the land. And the day after they had eaten from the produce of the land, the manna ceased. There was no more manna for the Israelites, so that year they began to eat the crops of the land of Canaan. Now when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua approached him and asked, Are you for us or for our enemies? Neither, he replied. I have now come as commander of the Lord's army. Then Joshua fell face down in reverence and asked him, What does my Lord have to say to his servant? The commander of the Lord's army replied, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." And Joshua did so. Now Jericho was tightly shut up because of the Israelites. No one went out and no one came in. And the Lord said to Joshua, "Behold, I have delivered Jericho into your hand, along with its king and its mighty men of valor. March around the city with all the men of war, circling the city one time. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry 7 ram's horns in front of the ark. Then on the 7th day, march around the city 7 times, while the priests blow the horns. And when there is a long blast of the ram's horn and you hear its sound, have all the people give a mighty shout. Then the wall of the city will collapse and all your people will charge straight into the city." So Joshua son of Nun summoned the priests and said, "Take up the ark of the covenant and have 7 priests carry 7 ram's horns in front of the ark of the Lord." And he told the people, "Advance and march around the city, with the armed troops going ahead of the ark of the Lord." After Joshua had spoken to the people, 7 priests carrying 7 ram's horns before the Lord advanced and blew the horns, and the ark of the covenant of the Lord followed them. While the horns continued to sound, the armed troops marched ahead of the priests who blew the horns, and the rear guard followed the ark. But Joshua had commanded the people, "Do not give a battle cry or let your voice be heard, do not let one word come out of your mouth until the day I tell you to shout. Then you are to shout." So he had the ark of the Lord carried around the city, circling it once. And the people returned to the camp and spent the night there. Joshua got up early the next morning, and the priests took the ark of the Lord. And the 7 priests carrying 7 ram's horns kept marching ahead of the ark of the Lord and blowing the horns. The armed troops went in front of them and the rear guard followed the ark of the Lord, while the horns kept sounding. So on the 2nd day they marched around the city once and returned to the camp. They did this for 6 days. Then on the 7th day, they got up at dawn and marched around the city 7 times in the same manner. That was the only day they circled the city 7 times. After the 7th time around, the priests blew the horns, and Joshua commanded the people, "Shout! For the Lord has given you the city. Now the city and everything in it must be devoted to the Lord for destruction. Only Rahab the prostitute and all those with her in her house will live, because she hid the spies we sent. But keep away from the things devoted to destruction, lest you yourself be set apart for destruction. If you take any of these, you will set apart the camp of Israel for destruction and bring disaster upon it. For all the silver and gold and all the articles of bronze and iron are holy to the Lord, they must go into his treasury." So when the ram's horn sounded, the people shouted. When they heard the blast of the horn, the people gave a great shout, and the wall collapsed. Then all the people charged straight into the city and captured it. At the edge of the sword they devoted to destruction everything in the city, man and woman, young and old, oxen, sheep, and donkeys. Meanwhile, Joshua told the 2 men who had spied out the land, "Go into the house of the prostitute and bring out the woman and all who are with her, just as you promised her." So the young spies went in and brought out Rahab, her father and mother and brothers, and all who belonged to her. They brought out her whole family and settled them outside the camp of Israel. Then the Israelites burned up the city and everything in it. However, they put the silver and gold and articles of bronze and iron into the treasury of the Lord's house. And Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute, with her father's household and all who belonged to her, because she hid the men Joshua had sent to spy out Jericho. So she has lived among the Israelites to this day. At that time Joshua invoked this solemn oath, "Cursed before the Lord is the man who rises up and rebuilds the city, Jericho, at the cost of his firstborn he will lay its foundations, at the cost of his youngest he will set up its gates." So the Lord was with Joshua. And his fame spread throughout the land. Luke 1 verses 1 to 20. Many have undertaken to compose an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by the initial eyewitnesses and servants of the word. Therefore, having carefully investigated everything from the beginning, it seemed good also to me to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of the things you have been taught. In the time of Herod king of Judea there was a priest named Zechariah, who belonged to the priestly division of Abijah, and whose wife Elizabeth was a daughter of Aaron. Both of them were righteous in the sight of God, walking blamelessly in all the commandments and decrees of the Lord. But they had no children, because Elizabeth was barren, and they were both well along in years. One day while Zechariah's division was on duty and he was serving as priest before God, he was chosen by lot, according to the custom of the priesthood, to enter the temple of the Lord and burn incense. and at the hour of the incense offering, the whole congregation was praying outside. Just then an angel of the Lord appeared to Zechariah, standing at the right side of the altar of incense. When Zechariah saw him, he was startled and gripped with fear. But the angel said to him, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah, because your prayer has been heard. Your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you are to give him the name John. He will be a joy and delight to you, and many will rejoice at his birth, for he will be great in the sight of the Lord. He shall never take wine or strong drink, and he will be filled with the Holy Spirit even from his mother's womb. Many of the sons of Israel he will turn back to the Lord their God. And he will go on before the Lord in the spirit and power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of the fathers to their children and the disobedient to the wisdom of the righteous, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord." "How can I be sure of this?" Zechariah asked the angel. "I am an old man, and my wife is well along in years." "I am Gabriel," replied the angel. "I stand in the presence of God, and I have been sent to speak to you and to bring you this good news. And now you will be silent and unable to speak until the day this comes to pass, because you did not believe my words, which will be fulfilled at their proper time."